Hello and welcome to another episode of the Hassle-Free RE podcast. I'm your host, Dave Menapace, and I'm joined here by my co-host, Anson Roberts. And before we get into introducing today's guest, we thought we'd share just some funny sort of news or nuances in the Airbnb space. So what we've heard recently is with one of the later Airbnb updates, there's a new type of cleaning fee structure specifically for stays that are only 1 or 2 days. And unfortunately, some operators got caught where guests would book a 2 day stay, 1 or 2 day stay, and they'd have no cleaning fee attached to it. Turns out there's a new field in that Airbnb platform for that, but not everyone is getting caught in the same issue. Anson, have you heard of that at all?
I've seen some chatter on forums with people's concern, borderline outrage at moments surrounding some of the heavy-handed tactics from the OTA standpoint. So, yeah, what was y'all? Did y'all look into it on your listings?
Yeah, we never ended up giving away any stays without cleaning fees, even though that field was blank for all of our properties. But what we did just to cover ourselves is we threw in a cleaning fee there that was $1 less than a traditional cleaning fee. So at least now, if somehow we become part of that algorithm that applies that, whatever it is, lack of a cleaning fee, we won't necessarily get caught with our pants down. And honestly, where this becomes an issue isn't necessarily for the properties we own. I mean, yeah, it would annoy me, but it is what it is. Quick fix if you own the property. But when you co-host, it then can become a point of contention on, well, who pays that cleaning fee? Does it come out of the owner's pocket or the co-host pocket who makes, you know, a fractional percentage of what the owner makes? And usually when you're in the management or co-host space, you really don't want to get caught in those situations where it even becomes a discussion over who pays for something. Just it creates friction and challenges when it's otherwise unnecessary. So that's what we've done.
Was there a specific reason for doing the $1 less than your standard cleaning fee?
Airbnb would not allow us to put the same cleaning fee in there.
Okay.
And so it made us do something that was less. So we did $1 less. And what I'll say is also, just to expand on this, you live and die by how good your systems are as a business owner. And cleaning companies are no different. And a lot of times, what we've found is that 2 people can make just as much of a mess as 12 people. It's not often, but it has happened. And for a cleaner, you also have to remember they're sending over usually 1 to 2, sometimes up to 4 team members, and they're building their schedule based off of that. And so they effectively, whether the cleaners are there for 1 hour or 4 hours, they're typically charging a flat rate. Sometimes they charge hourly, but typically they're charging a flat rate. And what it ends up doing is um, it's almost impossible to get a cleaner to agree to a lower rate because a guest is only there for 1 or 2 days. And a lot of times I've found that lower nights, usually people are there for an event. They're not there for a full week where they're taking after themselves. They're, cleaning up after themselves and caring for the home quite as much. And so, yeah, like I said, I find a 2 night stay is just as dirty as a 7 night stay. So it's kind of silly on Airbnb to even implement that, but it's kind of my
Yeah.
2 cents on it.
Yeah, I think it's more about public perception, you know, and
Yeah.
it's them trying to find their way through the weeds of what guests' perception is of the fee structures, and they are getting very creative on that front,
Yeah.
to say the
Yeah.
least.
You know what also is interesting, and I didn't even plan for us to touch on this in this intro, but I think it's interesting. It's kind of dying out now that the the discussion around Airbnb getting rid of cleaning fees, or how you as an owner or co-host should get rid of them in order to rank higher. A lot of that came from a press conference, a quarterly press conference from Brian Chesky, the CEO of Airbnb. And what I will say, just for reference, is almost every single one of my properties is on the first page of Airbnb, and we have a pretty hefty cleaning fee. We're not making money off of it. We're paying cleaners what they want. And I think that they're giving us fair prices for their services, and that's that. When a CEO of any company states something like, our new algorithm will do this, you have to remember there's only a small fraction of people on the planet that actually know how that full algorithm works, right? And at the same time, the CEO of Airbnb has an obligation to board members, stockholders, things like that. It's a publicly traded company. So in a lot of ways, him saying what an algorithm will do or not do is more important than actually achieving it through an engineering update to an algorithm. And I'm not saying that he went up there and lied about what his software, his, Airbnb is doing or not doing. But what I'm saying is that him making those remarks put certain people that needed to be put at ease. And then we could all go on with the rest of our day. And so for the time being, here we are months later. Once again, I have not noticed a single difference in the performance of my properties, and I have not made a single change to any cleaning fees. So that's
Same.
my 2 cents.
Same. We dabbled in the waters of trying to eliminate cleaning fees and bake it into the price. And then we just got more questions from guests, didn't see any performance increases in the properties, and we went back to resuming business as usual. So
yeah. Funny how that works. So, and that's with a lot of things outside of just Airbnb and vacation rentals. So with that, let's introduce our guest. So our guest today is Kim Menapace. She runs Five Star Cohost with me. We're also married and have a few lovely kids. And she had recently gone to WealthCon, which is hosted by Ryan Pineda. It's a quarterly conference and it's located in Las Vegas. And Kim decided to go to it because one of her favorite sort of stage mentors, so to speak, Ed Mylett, was presenting. And we had the opportunity to sit down with Kim and really get to talk about what her biggest takeaways were. And it was a lot of fun. It was a really great conversation. Great to have her back on the show. What were some of your takeaways from the discussion, Anson?
Yeah, one, I was a little bit jealous of the conference. It sounds like an absolute all-star lineup. And she had some really incredible nuggets of wisdom to pull from that. And so one of the most relevant components for me was around making sure that I'm working on the right things and constantly assessing, am I utilizing my time and resources on the highest leverage activities in areas of engagement? And just a reminder of the susceptibility to putting my head down and getting work done. But getting work done and getting the work done is very different. And so that was a key takeaway for my end. How about you?
There were a few. One of the biggest ones was just, I guess there were a few that are all sort of interconnected, but the importance of creating several streams of income. And when you invest in mentors and also just put yourself in the right room, like WealthCon, and be around other like-minded people, it's amazing some of these different opportunities to create new streams of income that can be sitting right under your nose that you might have never noticed, or you might not have had enough encouragement to lean into it. And I thought that was pretty cool. So
Love it.
cool. Well, without further ado, let's introduce Kim. Welcome to the Hassle-Free RE Podcast, a real estate podcast where we bring you stories, education, and tips for investors and real estate enthusiasts. If you're interested in investing in real estate or just want to keep a pulse on what's happening in the market, then this podcast is for you. Thanks so much for listening and tuning in. If you enjoy our show, please make sure to subscribe and give us a 5-star review. We'd greatly appreciate it. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Hassle-Free RE Podcast. Today we have joining us Kim Menapace. And before she does her introduction, just a little context. Kim most recently went to the Wealth Conference, or I might be saying that wrong, WealthCon in Las Vegas, hosted by Ryan Pineda. And she had a lot of really awesome takeaways from that conference. And so we really wanted to create a time to go through those and get Kim back on the show to talk about some of those things. So Kim, why don't you introduce yourself, and maybe we'll start with like your top 5 takeaways and we'll go from there.
Sounds good. So yes, I'm a boomerang back to this podcast. So thank you, Anson, for filling in since your schedule is less impossible than mine. So I appreciate it. So yes, I'm Kim Menapace, entrepreneur, wife, mom. So owner of 2 short-term rentals, myself with my husband, Dave, obviously. And then we have a management company as well, where we co-host for other people's vacation homes.
Boom. All right. So maybe let's start, I guess I have a little bit of an inside track here, maybe a couple weeks before the conference, which would have been in mid-September, you kind of approached me and just said, I feel like I have to go to this. Ed Mylett is one of the presenters, and obviously you're a big follower of his. But you had this sort of burning desire to go. So I knew better than to argue with you on that. I said, yeah, of course, go for it. And it turned out to be a really great use of your time, and you enjoyed it a lot. So why don't you jump in and let's start talking about it.
Yeah, so it was funny that I even stumbled on this conference. I follow Ed Mylett, and I've had for a number of years. And I heard Ryan Pineda on Ed's podcast, and that's what got me interested in listening to some of Ryan's content, and then discovering Ed was actually going to speak at his next WealthCon. Now, they do these Wealth conferences quarterly, and a lot of people that go to them are in the Vegas area or West Coast. So it's a lot easier for them to get to there every 3 months. So coming from the East Coast, from Boston, 5.5-hour flight, I knew it'd be a bit more of a commitment, but I ran the numbers and it wasn't that expensive for flights, for the hotel, the conference tickets. They always do 50% off promos, as you know, with although the plethora of conferences going on here. So yeah, my gut was just telling me to go. I think that you could easily go to a conference every week if you wanted to, or every other week. And so I try to be very selective, given PTO still, given family, and given other commitments and conferences we have. So yeah, my gut was telling me to go. And I actually caught up with a friend of mine, Jayla Siciliano, who's also a short-term rental operator, and was telling her about this conference I was interested in. She's on the West Coast, and she said, I actually need that content. It's for business, entrepreneurship, as well as social media and creating a personal brand. And she's really working on the last one. And so we both decided to go at the same time. It was early September, and we booked it for the first week of October. So yeah, really exciting. Ed Mylett's the reason I decided to go. If he weren't the keynote speaker, I probably wouldn't have gone, but there were a number of other great speakers that I hadn't heard of before, and now I'm following and consuming their content. So really grateful to really lean into this and have it be an opportunity, because sometimes these things can be out of budget, not great timing, but it just seemed to have all the stars align, and it was meant to happen this time.
Love it. Love it. So, and it was it 3 days? Okay, so it was a 3-day conference. So why don't you kind of give us a rundown and maybe share what some of your top takeaways are, and we'll have a discussion around those.
Yeah, so it's typically a 2-day conference. Jayla's ticket got upgraded to an MVP status, and she had bought some courses from them. So that's why I was able to go to a workshop at Ryan's office the day before the conference officially started. So I'd say the first big takeaway that was interesting was when I introduced myself as an Airbnb owner and operator. It was kind of doomsday. Oh, what are you thinking about all of this regulation crackdown in Dallas and New York City? And it's just a lot of people aren't doing Airbnbs, they're doing flips and wholesaling. And so I had to educate them immediately on there's 3 different categories of Airbnb properties. You could be in urban markets where there's a lot of regulation finally creeping in. That was a little slow at times. And there's the drive to vacation destinations like Cape Cod or ski resorts in Maine for us up in here in Massachusetts. And then there's the fly to destinations like going to Disney World or Hawaii. And so when the pandemic hit, obviously urban slowed down. People weren't traveling for work or to go check out colleges or whatever it might be. And then also with air travel being really, locked down, people weren't going to Disney World or Hawaii. So our drive-to destination vacations have been around for 100 years for Cape Cod, for example, and they actually did better during the pandemic. We are seeing a dip now that people can go to Europe and fly to destinations a bit easier and maybe even cheaper than some of these places as the prices have crept up. But I had to start doing that education and that concept that we first heard in Avery Carl's book that seems obvious now in retrospect, but is brand new information to people who aren't in the industry and space and who are thinking of all the top line news articles that they hear that are just kind of trying to be clickbaity and scaring people.
What was the response as you shared and leaned into some of that actual real world information around that? Was there surprise, or what was their response to that?
It kind of shut it down instead of opening it up, which is a bit of a bummer. But I think that they'd say, "Oh, that makes sense. Okay, got it," and then we'd move on to a different topic. So yeah, it wasn't as much of a conversation starter, but I think because people are there's just a diversity of what people are, where people are coming from. Whereas Dave and I, we are the conferences or on in-person events that we've done have been with primarily short-term rental operators. So that seems very obvious to them. Whereas here is like a great, nugget of information. And then we kind of move past it.
It is funny when that stuff comes up. It's all, and it comes up every now and again, not that much, but it's like, I feel like this weight come over me of just like, I don't really feel like having this discussion right now. And it can be rather frustrating at times. And again, it's usually people that aren't even investing in real estate or just no idea, and that's fine. It's like totally fine. But good for you for kind of sticking with it and moving past that.
And Dave, I'd add, I think people have approached us to manage, hey, I have a apartment in Boston. Can you manage it for us? And we have to say, hey, Boston only allows owner occupied and X and Y and Z. So even people, clients that are approaching us to manage, we have to educate that even if they do allow it and there's a permitting system and all that, we just don't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole right now. And I think there's still regulation can still creep into these regional drive-to vacation destinations. Cape Cod does have a permitting system. It's $50 for the year. They give out thousands of them. There's no issues with it. Up in Maine, there's talks of them starting to do it, but it's more just an official system to track it and to earn some revenue for the town that's going to enforce it. So I think that it's still a good conversation starter and education point for people. And we've even had to do it for clients or potential clients saying, we don't want to touch urban. Portland, Maine has been approached to us, Boston, or so I think that's not uncommon when people think of Airbnb.
It's interesting thinking about the public perception around STRs at this point, because it's quite different than it was a couple years ago. Like there was a period of time where it seemed like, within the real estate world specifically, there can be these frenzies of public, the focus of where the real estate kind of mastermindy space is focusing, whether it's self-storage and then it's STR, and then it kind of has its cycles through things. And so we went through a phase of STRs being like the buzz. And now there's, because of honestly a lot of mainstream news publicity of regulations and public perception around fee structures and things like that, there's this hesitancy that you experienced. But I'm curious what your perception is around is that actually negative from an investor standpoint? Because when you think about the interest in the market, I would argue there's actually something interesting if there's less people like actually vying for that market space, because there's not a frenzy, it's not driving up home prices. It actually will affect the competition in the space. How are you seeing that?
I agree with you. I think that the negative publicity, and then also people who did buy into the hype in the last couple of years, overpaid, aren't augmenting their systems and operations, and then realizing it's more work than they want. If they did outsource it to a management company, they probably couldn't cover their expenses. And I think that there's going to be properties coming on the market. Dave and I are already seeing this. One in our neighborhood in Cape Cod is up for sale for way too high of a price. And we were actually running numbers to see if it could work at a crazy offer from us. So I think that you are going to see people offloading their Airbnbs over the next couple of years because it wasn't making what they expected because of the scare tactics and everything. So I think it's a class of real estate that Dave and I will always operate in because of the personal usage side of it, which we love. And so we are going to own vacation homes till the day we die. So I think that it's not a phase or a fad for us, but I think it is attractive for people to get into the game, period, who don't want to do long-term rental, don't want to do mid-term rental, don't want to do flips and everything, that might dabble and do one type of real estate investment, and they might buy one vacation home for their whole lifetime. And I think that's great. And I'm glad that people do that. I just think people need to go in very educated. And I think that we are constantly trying to share that education and what we know, and also really hit on really sound operators who are constantly trying to improve, that are using the top-notch technologies and tools and listening to these updates without freaking out and going too crazy one way or another, are going to be fine, and we're going to rise to the top. And so I think that also these professional operators also get a bad rep, where people say we're ruining certain neighborhoods or towns, or we're part of the problem for Airbnb exploding, where I think it's the opposite, where we have such high standards of how we operate our homes and the level of hospitality and customer service we deliver, that I hope we're actually setting the bar so that other people are trying to strive to that. We're just always trying to be better than ourselves and how we were yesterday. So I think of it as a motivator, that even though it seems like more properties are coming online, there's still an inflation number in there, where I think people were renting by word of mouth and through local real estate agencies. And then as those properties turn over to younger family members, people are finally listing it on Airbnb, and then everyone's freaking out and saying, hey, there's so many more Airbnbs. And I think I think some have flipped from long-term homes and primary homes to Airbnbs, but I also think those numbers are just creeping up because of that family turnover and people renting by other methods.
Yeah, it's interesting considering the kind of volatile nature of the conversation in the real estate world. Whenever I don't think the actual traveler they're not privy to all this dialogue. Like, people still go on vacation. Like, they're still going to take their trip to Maine. They're still going to do their family vacation. And the real estate investors are like constantly like under a microscope inspecting what's going on in the market. And in the midst of that, like, there are millions of people still traveling every day. And so it's important. I mean, I remember a while back, I was starting to get caught up in some of that frenzy of dialogue around it. And you like look at the traveler demand and the actual data there, and you're like, if you can separate yourself from the noise, that coupled with the kind of slowdown in the housing market, prices softening a bit, and people are still traveling, it makes me actually curious about opportunities out there whenever it's not as sexy right now to do STR. And that's for the people who are in it to actually build a business. Like, that's music to our ears,
Absolutely. Totally. Yeah. And it is funny, like the focus of things, it always shifts. And there was a lot of buzz around when New York, quote unquote, shut down STRs, but Boston did that like 12 years ago. Boston did it forever ago. And we haven't talked about it once in Massachusetts since then. So I think it just goes back to like understanding whatever your real estate strategy is and leaning into that and just educating yourself on it. And, to me, like I don't understand stocks in the same way that I understand short-term rentals. I'm not going to try to either. And I'd probably end up seeing something online and thinking like, ooh, should I pull all of my stocks? It's the same sort of thing. Well, with that, should we go to your next takeaway from the conference?
Yeah, actually, I'll do it in a different order than I thought, given how this conversation can navigate.
Sure.
So, one of the things that I learned was Ryan Pineda shared that you should have different investments with different cash flow cycles. And what he meant by that is he has a wholesaling arm and branch of his team, which is much quicker transactions, less than a couple months. Then he has a flipping bit arm, which is typically 3 to 4 months, hopefully for a flip. But because of this year and the interest rates, they're looking at 6 to 9 months and losing money on those because they got caught in the bad side of the interest rates and the demand softening. Then he has apartment complexes and buildings. So I loved his session where he was uber transparent on the losses and the misses and the learnings from that stuff. And he said, I lost $2 million on flips this year because we have 50 to 60 going at any time. We learned from that lesson. We had to use money from the wholesaling and sell some apartment complexes to help cover those losses. He said, when you have a loss, so say you thought you'd make 2 million and you lost 2 million, you actually have a $4 million gap from what you expected for your plan. So he said there's those types. So I think that diversity piece is really important as we're just talking about short-term rentals and the how it comes in fashion and then out of fashion. I think that him having a diversity of investment strategies helped him take those losses, and they also had to sell stuff to help cover it. So he said, we can always focus on the positives, and he showed all the different companies and branches he opened this year. So it was a great year, but he wants people to be open, honest, and transparent about that side of the business as well.
I think there's a couple really important points to pick out. The first thing I'm hearing, and I totally agree with, is just the importance of having multiple streams of income. You can either be, really prescriptive, or, with it in terms of the cash flow cycles and the frequency of payment and the seasonality of that. But just generally speaking, most people don't become millionaires by having one stream of income. And if they do, that's pretty risky. So I think that just on a general level, that's, a really important point that I'm picking out of that.
What did that elicit for you processing wise personally from diversification of business or income? Did that spur anything on your end?
No, I think Dave and I are constantly thinking about that. And we actually, on our whiteboard in our room, we're writing down the different ways we've made money this year. And some of them, it's a couple $100s that we want to grow in the future, like speaking, for example. And so I think that's always been our mind. Why it resonated more with me was that vulnerability and being honest, because Dave and I will be honest on, hey, this house is breaking even. We thought it would make more. It's not. It's breaking even. We're calling that a win in and of itself. And it's an opportunity and a stepping stone to bigger things. We don't know yet. Some of them we do know, and some of them we don't know. So I think that's something I appreciated, because sometimes you get scraps and bits and pieces of these honest misses from people, but he had a whole session about these kinds of learnings he had this year. And it also dovetailed into his family life. He said his wife was pregnant with their third child. He's actually really good about shutting off his phone at 5 o'clock and going home for dinner and family time. And the weekends as well is very protected time for family. And he had phone calls creeping into those times. He was more distracted. He was less present. And he hadn't been honest with his wife about all of these headaches and some of the biggest challenges of his career were happening this year. And so when they were able to have an honest conversation and air that out, and for him to say, I was trying to protect you from this stuff, but this is what's going on. We're losing millions on the flipping business. And that's why I'm jumping on the phone a lot more during family time. I'm sorry. I should have told you, but I was trying to protect you from that, those failures and those misses. And so I really appreciated that tone to it, more so than the diversity of investments. I think doing flips and things like that are on my mind, and I'm not in the near term, but I think it was more that vulnerability and sharing that, because I think more people need to be upfront about that, because I think everyone's comparing themselves to your winning scorecard, and we all hide the non-winning scorecards and bury them.
Yep. Yeah. Well, and especially people that have a fairly large following or presence, right? There's a way to, sometimes I think there's a perception of how you maintain that presence or grow that following is by pushing a certain agenda. You know what I mean? And I think that, to your point, just like any other industry, whether it's real estate or selling cars or tech or healthcare, there's always a winning and losing side of things depending on how you look at it. And having those losses or those failures is a lot of times really, really healthy. I mean, I think of all the things